and more after that. He signed up for the clubs I was in, stole my personal items, stalked me, talked about me, and tried to get the same schedule as me. I couldn't prove he was the one who stole my things, so the principal couldn't do anything. He tried to get on the bus with me. He told everyone we were dating and in a great relationship. I told everyone that we weren't. He convinced my language arts teacher to let us be partners, and he just stared at me while I did most of the work that he copied off of. I was obsessed with good grades. I couldn't take it anymore, so I told the school counselor, and she talked to Josh and his parents. He told me he was sorry and asked if we could be friends. He told my school counselor before, and he talked to me, so I was basically forced into this friendship. I had a birthday party which wasn't really a party. I would just hang out with one of my friends and eat cake and open presents. I chose Chris. We lived in the same neighborhood. We were good friends, and I texted him when the party was, and somehow Josh found out. He showed up at my doorstep. I was freaking out. My mom answered the door, telling Josh that I was somewhere else with my friend. I know it was mean, but I was scared of him. He got angry with me at school and tried to hit me, and his parents talked to the principal, and Josh could stay in the school but had to switch classes and stay away from me. Josh, for yours and my sake, let's never meet. Update. I forgot to type this last part. Josh lost his reputation at school. His friends are still friends with him out of pity, I'm assuming, and most of the girls stay away from him and are creeped out. There was a note that was slipped into my locker saying it was my fault everyone hates him. Some students are on Josh's side, saying I overreacted and that I lied when I said he came over to my house. Now it's summer, and I haven't seen him since, but I have heard rumors from my school friends saying he got into juvie. I received a text from him about 2 weeks ago, and then I blocked him. He was asking me how I felt about him. I didn't text him back, but if I did, I would have told him that I hate him from the bottom of my heart. He told lies about me and how I did terrible things. One of the students lost her phone, and he told everyone I stole it. I got my locker and backpack searched. Everyone hated me, and I lost a few of my friends since they didn't want to be hated by the other students. Now I know they weren't very good friends. Thanks for ruining my reputation. To Josh, I don't want to see your stupid face and your ignorant personality, so stay away if you want all your teeth.
When I was 14, I had a paper route. Occasionally I would have to deliver newspapers to those without a subscription. One evening in the summer, I went to deliver the extra newspapers, and my mum wanted to come with me. My route would be just a few blocks, so we rode our bikes, and the whole trip lasted for maybe 10 to 15 minutes max. This was back when people weren't too worried about locking their doors. I remember we left our garage door open, which was really dumb. When we got back, I got inside and saw that our sliding door was open. When we got back, I went inside and saw that our sliding door was open a little bit. Now, that is not too uncommon, but our dog was barking like crazy. My mum walked down the hall and comes back with a panicked look on her face. She very seriously asked me if I had been in her room. I tell her no, and she tells me to go inside my room and lock the door. Someone had been in the house. I look out the bedroom window, which faces the backyard, and I can see my mum looking around. She comes back inside and tells me to come to her room. On the floor, all of my dad's guns were laid out. They were usually in their gun cases, but right now they were all out of the cases and laying in a row. He had about 5 guns, and they were always hidden in the back of his closet. You were scared. My mum called Dad to come home from work, but I don't know why she didn't call the cops. My dad looked around and, of course, found nobody and nothing that was taken out of the house. My mum's purse was out on the kitchen table, and that had not been taken. My dad hadn't told anyone about his guns being hidden in the closet, though. How did someone know we had left? We had one creepy neighbor next door, which we didn't really suspect at the time. I'm just glad we did not walk in before they left. There must have been more than one person, because my mum's room was in the back of the house. A second person must have been looking out the window and seen us coming at that time. That was many years ago, and we still talk about how scary that was.
To begin with, I'm a girl and I moved to a different street in the same town. We had to move out of our old house that we were renting because somebody was interested in buying it. I was 13. We moved our stuff by our car and didn't bother using a truck since the house was in the same town. I had my own luggage, and when my family was inside, I was outside with my sister. Her name is Sammy. Anyway, a neighbor was outside on the porch and would glance at us. He told us he was 31 and he was Caucasian and always had messy clothing on. Being the paranoid freak I was, I told my sister. She was 10. Sammy shrugged it off, saying I was being too cautious. My mom is also extremely paranoid, and when I go outside alone or with friends, she says don't talk to strangers, don't follow people, the usual stuff. I felt safe in our town because it's been a year since my old encounter with a guy who tried to steal my dog, and I haven't seen him since. I've never really felt comfortable talking about my experiences, but I decided to write most of them this year. Anyway, the neighbors seemed friendly. Me and my sister let our guard down and told him our names and ages. I know, that's a terrible idea, but he already greeted our parents and didn't seem creepy. Yet. That was the first day. So, after a week of living in the house, whenever I walked past, he would always greet me. It seemed a little strange that he was always on his front porch when I left for school and when I came back. I never thought anything of it. One time, he followed me to the bus stop. I was talking to my friend Sophia, just casual school stuff, and I didn't notice he had followed me. I felt scared, and Sophia seemed to just reply with, okay, or yeah, sure, to whatever he had to say. She told her parents, and she was more careful since all the neighbor did was talk to us about appropriate things. He talked kind of like an old friend. This continued. He would watch me from his porch, so I started leaving from my deck that led to the backyard. There were stairs, in case you were wondering. I never told my parents yet since I thought maybe he just hung out there frequently. I was walking our foster dog, a greyhound named Goose. The neighbor petted him and talked about the dog. He laughed at his name. It sort of freaked me out since he laughed until he couldn't breathe. It was just a name. And then he said out of nowhere, "Why do you keep leaving from the yard to go to the bus stop?" Wait.
I thought maybe my Grams was coming to check in on me and rub my back, grandma kind of stuff, until I heard her cough from the living room. I froze, my head under the covers, refusing to move them, thoughts running. Was my mom home early? No, if it was my mom, she would move closer or lay down beside me, not sit at the end of the bed, seemingly just staring at me, no words. Was it my little sister sneaking out of her room to sleep in my mom's bedroom? No, the weight was too much, too heavy, like a grown adult. Then I started to feel uneasy, unsafe. The weight wasn't moving, just felt like it was sitting there, watching me, knowing I was awake and could sense it there. I wasn't willing to move. I barely breathed just to hope it would go away, but it didn't. For what seemed like hours, but was probably mere minutes, the standoff continued, me hiding under the covers, it sitting there. Stoic, unnerving, intimidating. until finally the weight lifted and went away, taking the sense of dread with it. I was feeling drained and exhausted, and that led to me finally blacking out back into the safety of sleep, waking up just in time to hear my mom come in the front door. This story has a semi-long intro, so please bear with me. In the year 2013, I was a sophomore in high school in Southern California. I had earlier that year moved to a city called Menifee, which is mainly a suburb for the working folk in the Riverside County. Anyways, while I was a new kid, I was still able to make a couple of friends pretty quickly. I'm changing their names for anonymity reasons. Let's call them Bradley, Jacob, and Austin. Bradley being my closest friend among the three to this day. I remember it being on a Friday during that year's fall season. They all happened to live on a cul-de-sac, which was about over 1.5 miles from where I lived. Since my neighborhood consisted of elderly people, I usually spent my time over at theirs, at around noon till late the very morning the next day. Well, the day of my story's occurrence happened to be one of those days. Frankly, I don't remember what actually we did that day. All I remember was since it was a Friday, my mom allowed me to stay out later. When the time reached around midnight, my mom texted me and told me to come home as she was going to sleep. I would have asked my friends if their parents could give me a ride home, but unfortunately they were all fast asleep and I didn't want to bug my friends by asking if I could sleep over, so I gave my friends a farewell and headed home. 5 minutes into my journey, I actually didn't mind having to walk. The air was nice and cool, and I always loved the night sky. Between me and my friends' homes, there was an elementary school with a wide green flat park right next to it. The park having no lights and being totally pitch black. I was about to pass the park when I noticed a man sitting on a bench near the corner of the park close to me, about 100 feet away. I couldn't really see his face, but could decipher that he was a tall, bald, white guy in a black hoodie and shorts. Besides glancing at him once and taking in all those details about him, I didn't really pay much attention to him and continued on my way. I just kept walking forward, occasionally glancing at my phone for no particular reason. When I neared the lamppost near the sidewalk I was traveling on, I noticed that when I looked down in front of me, a second shadow opposite to mine was casted. I instantly thought it was someone else, that guy I'd seen earlier most likely being the caster. I quickened my pace while trying not to make it too obvious to get some distance between me and whoever was behind me. Now, some people probably wouldn't mind or care if they had to share the sidewalk with a stranger, but since it was late at night and I'm a pretty scrawny guy, I didn't want to risk getting mugged. Eventually, I decided to cross the street. I looked both ways for cars, but obviously it was to see who was behind me, and sure enough, it was the same man. It was a little brighter due to there being lampposts, and I quickly got another look at him. He was built and about 6 feet tall. After I crossed, I continued down my same route, but shortly after, I noticed that the guy had also crossed the street and was once again right behind me. Okay, now I was starting to really freak out as my heart began to beat faster. Up ahead, the street, which connected into my neighborhood, was within sight. At first, I felt relieved, but then I realized that I didn't want the guy to follow me home and know where I lived. Instead of turning into my street, I continued walking forward until I approached another street coming off the main road. I quickly sped up and turned in, and once I knew I was a little out of sight, I began to jog away quickly. When I was like 100 yards away from the mouth of the street, I twisted my head around to clarify if the man had continued following me. He was, and not just following, he was full on sprinting, and at that moment I decided, fuck it, and also began to sprint away. I didn't even know where I was running at that point, or which new street I was running into. I just had to get away. After running for a while, I ended up thinking of the idea to run to the side of the house that actually had 2 trash bins next to it. I laid flat on my belly and faced the street. Luckily for me, I had been wearing a black jacket, so hopefully I was able to blend into the darkness around me. I laid there for a minute when this guy happened to stop running on the sidewalk near where I was laying. He stood there and scanned the area around him really fast. My heart stopped when he looked my way. When he couldn't see me, he continued running in the direction he'd been facing. I waited there for 5 more minutes so that he would be long gone. Afterwards, I bolted straight home, but it still took me half an hour. I never told my parents about that experience since we had finally settled in and I had made my own group of friends and didn't want to risk moving again. The event itself slowly faded from my mind until recently. My only precaution was to never walk home at that time again. I never found out who that guy was, but in the years following, I discovered that in the early 2000s, the local high school had a neo-Nazi problem, but had since been rooted out. I'm not positive that's why he ran after me, but it does seem possible that a white supremacist wouldn't mind roughing up a smaller Latino in the middle of the night with no one else around. I was about 3 years old at the time. My brother was 5. Our parents were going through a divorce, so my grandparents offered to look after me and my brother until the divorce was final so that we weren't caught up in the mess. My grandparents' anniversary was coming up, so my grandmother thought it'd help our mother take her mind off things to spend some time with us so she could relax. She and my grandfather went out for the evening and left me and my brother home with our mother for the night. Things seemed to be going good at first, nothing out of the ordinary. It was starting to get a bit late and my brother and I were sitting on the living room floor watching television. After a while she asked if we had heard anything, and I remember we both looked at her and she had this worried look on her face. She muted the television for a moment to listen, and we started hearing noises coming from our basement. It was the sound of our bathroom door in our basement swinging open and closed again. It sounded like someone had just walked into the bathroom and slammed the door. But that couldn't be possible, seeing as how me, my older brother, and our mom were the only ones in the house at the time. Mom dismissed it at first, reasoning that the house was just old and old houses usually make strange noises. So we went back to watching television again for a while. After about an hour or so had passed, it was around 8 o'clock. Almost time for my brother and I to go to bed. Mom muted the television again and told us to be quiet. We listened for a minute and didn't hear anything at first. Then after a while, we began to hear the sound of pounding coming from the basement just under the living room floor. It was soft at first, but as it went on, it got louder and louder. The sound encircled the living room almost like a shark circling in on its prey. It got closer to where my brother and I were sitting as it circled around us, growing louder and louder, until it finally sounded like someone was banging on the living room floor under us with their fists, trying to break through the floorboards. Me and my brother jumped up onto the couch and huddled ourselves close around our mom, who was curled up on the couch and was just as scared as we were.